Speaker. According to Cassandra Goldie, the CEO of the Australian Council of Social Services, it's not right that Australia, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, vulnerable people are going without the help they desperately need. As I rise to speak to this legislation, then, I do so with the full confidence that my electorate of North Sydney could not agree more with Dr Goldie. It is shocking to reflect on the fact that right now in Australia, more than 3 million people are living below the poverty line. That's 1 in every 10 Australians, Mr Deputy Speaker. Even more shocking is that a huge portion of these people are there because they're trying to survive on the paltry social service payments our federal government currently offers. I acknowledge that this is not a circumstance that has been created by our current government. Rather, it is the consequence of a decade of dismissal, disrespect and minimisation. I was devastated to hear the commentary that aired on Sunday night on Channel 7 during their Spotlight program, where a young Australian who is dedicated to poverty reduction whilst living on the disability pension herself reported that 1 in 3 of the people who took their own lives last year were on some form of social security payment. How can that be possible in this, the luckiest of countries? When I look further then, I found the following. As of April 2024, over 800,000 people are on JobSeeker in Australia. Many of these will be among the 1.3 million households who were receiving Commonwealth rent assistance in April 2022. They may also have been among the 60,000 people who were receiving private rental assistance from a state or territory government. Mr Speaker, this is not one group or type of person. Those who currently access these payments can be as young as 16 or as mature as 65. 17% of First Nations people over the age of 15 are currently accessing these payments, compared to 3.4% of other Australians. Meanwhile, people aged 16 and over living in remote areas are 5 times more likely to be receiving unemployment payments than those living in major cities. So what are these people actually receiving? Well, a single person with no children and full JobSeeker will receive around $762.70 per fortnight, while a single person with a dependent child or children will receive $816.90. That's the same amount that someone who is single, over 55 and has 9 months of continuing payment will receive, while those who are partnered receive $693.30 per fortnight. Meanwhile, data from CoreLogic released in April 2024 shows the national median advertised market rents are at a record high level, costing $625 per week. This cost has grown at a rate of 9.1% a year over the past 3 years. Running those numbers then, you don't need to be an actuary to know a considerable number of these people must be living hand-to-mouth with severe housing stress. And while most Australians are struggling through a cost of living crisis right now, we must recognise there is an ocean of need. And while this government is at least doing something, the truth is that the something is the equivalent to stirring a teaspoon of sugar into it. The Social Services and Other Legislation Amendment, More Support in the Safety Net Bill 2024, does add more support to the social safety net, but the net remains riddled with holes. While the bill delivers minor positive investment, all in all it's missed the opportunity to address the deepest fundamental societal challenges. The government itself has identified that Australians are facing a set of serious and compounding challenges, including a slowing economy, rising unemployment, falling spending power and a housing crisis and a climate crisis. The intergenerational report released last year shone a light on the barriers to economic inclusion and participation in Australia for underrepresented and historically disadvantaged groups. These include women who continue to face barriers to finding a job or working the hours they would prefer, with a key barrier being unpaid work and caring responsibility, particularly for those with younger children. Under the measures being introduced then, just 4,700 Australians will be eligible for the higher rate of JobSeeker payment. 4,700 Australians from a pool that currently contains 1.3 million people. Others will receive rental assistance, the rental assistance increase, which is offered at a rate of, adding the last 2 years together, of 25%, in a market that has grown 27% in 3 years. Yet others will explore the flexibility of carer payment recipients, but ultimately people on the lowest incomes in our country expected and deserved more from this budget. In the words of the Australian Council of Social Services, this budget has a hole at its heart. It's not enough for the 100,000 Australians who remain homeless on any given night, the single mother who stays in a violent home because the alternative is poverty, people with a disability who are struggling to gain employment, or the carers of young children who are facing barriers re-entering the workforce. The budget is about choice, and the government has chosen to not go further when it comes to lifting Australians out of poverty. I stand with sector stakeholders in calling for meaningful investment to prioritise the needs of vulnerable Australians and address the inadequacy of our social support payments. Looking deeper into the bill, the Commonwealth Rent Assistance increase, due to be implemented from the 20th of September this year, provides an additional nominal support for nearly 1 million recipient households. Yet the real rate of this payment will arguably not make a dent in the rapidly increasing rental prices. In true dollar terms, these households will receive an increase of up to $18.80 for a single person, or up to $25.06 per fortnight for families, depending on the household type. Mr Deputy Speaker, an extra $25 per fortnight for families. This in a market where, in my own seat of North Sydney, the rental property I recently vacated with my children was offered to the incoming family at a whopping $200 more per week than I had paid. Indeed, in my electorate of North Sydney, the average weekly rent has risen 17.5% to $700, with houses renting at $1,200 a week. This level of rent is simply unachievable for everyday Australians, let alone those reliant on social service payments for support, and far too many people will still be without affordable homes after this budget. For some time, housing and welfare experts have been calling for changes to be made to the Commonwealth Rent Assistance arrangements, and the Productivity Commission itself recently recommended the government should review Commonwealth Rent Assistance as a priority. They argued there is a strong case for changes to improve its adequacy and targeting. But there is no improvement to adequacy or targeting in the measures included in this bill. Meanwhile, ACOS offers the following. The modest Commonwealth Rent Assistance increase builds on last year's rise, giving a single person an extra $9.40 a week if they're receiving the maximum rate. Based on median rents, private renters receiving job seeker or youth allowance will still be in deep housing stress because their base rate of payment is so low. Even with the increase, they will be paying half of their income in rent alone. Bringing this into the real world then, someone in North Sydney recently shared with me that the present housing crisis places me, like hundreds of thousands of Australians, at imminent risk of homelessness at the age of 73. This person is a lifetime resident. They've had a successful career, they've carried their weight, contributed to our society, and they've paid their taxes. They should never be in a vulnerable position like this, a position that a 10% rise in Commonwealth rental assistance is unlikely to address. Ultimately, while I wish I could say otherwise, the government has failed to take the bold action required to address the housing crisis, effectively maintaining current inadequate funding levels for the National Agreement for another 5 years when there is a huge demand for social housing. It is of huge concern that this budget did not include any new funding for social housing. In the words of Everybody's Home, a national campaign to fix this housing crisis, what the government has announced is a business-as-usual spend that is nowhere near enough to shift the dial on the housing crisis. The government's new funding for social housing is a repackaging of existing initiatives, offering loans instead of providing real funding, and the continuation of a funding agreement with the states and territories, something the Commonwealth routinely renews for other essential services like education and health. The safety net is simply not being spread anywhere near wide enough, Mr Speaker, to support those on income support payments. It's of concern that the Commonwealth Rent Assistance is only available to people in receipt of income support or an amount of family tax benefit over the base rate of Family Tax Benefit Part A, and not to other people on low incomes who are renting privately. Meanwhile, high rents and unaffordable housing are driving essential workers out of the North Sydney electorate. When I met with midwives at a significant hospital in my area recently, I learnt staff shortages are exacerbated by staff moving away to find more affordable rentals. The desperation felt by Australians in the current environment, both young and old, is something I feel very deeply. Finally, the fact that the maximum rates of this payment are being indexed to CPI rather than the average rents paid by Commonwealth Rent Assistance recipients is frustrating and makes no sense to me. Increases in rents are outstripping general inflation in many areas of Australia, and this is a systematic issue in need of serious attention. Earlier this year, I moved a motion that asked the House to take note of the fact that the routine CPI indexation that took effect will increase job seeker payments by just 96 cents per day. This indexation lifted job seeker payment to $55 a day, which equates to less than half the minimum wage full-time. The government's media release at the time announced these changes as indexation puts more in the pockets of millions of Australians. Yet it failed to acknowledge that income support payments are not enough to cover the cost of essential goods and services, including housing, food and energy. Devastatingly, I see similar headlines when it comes to the measures introduced in this bill. The government claims it's easing the cost of living pressures through the job seeker measures, as I have now explained, but these changes do not even cover 0.5% of the population who needs it. Last year saw the establishment of the Economic Inclusion Advisory Committee. The committee's role is to provide independent advice to the government before every federal budget on economic inclusion and tackling disadvantage. Tasked with this role by this government, along with other key welfare organisations, that committee has specifically recommended that job seeker payments should be lifted to 90% of the value of the age pension as the most effective way to tackle poverty. Yet in this most recent budget, that advice was ignored, and the measures introduced through this bill are nowhere near such an increase. And so 7 in 10 people on income support are eating less and reporting difficulty getting essential medicine and care because their incomes are inadequate. And the situation we see ourselves in deteriorates daily. When coupled with poor services and stigma around receiving these payments, the inadequacy of the job seeker payments is truly damaging. The truth is the changes in this legislation are entirely insufficient to prevent the widespread distress experienced by income support recipients in the current economic climate. The concept of a carer payment as an income support payment for those providing constant care to someone with a disability or a medical condition or an adult who's frail-aged is something I strongly support, and it deserves more attention than it's been given in these new measures. The care and support economy is one of the fastest-growing parts of the Australian economy, yet the care sector is gravely under-resourced and overburdened. The current rules around the carer payment have contributed to ongoing disadvantage, and the changes in this bill to relax the rules and improve flexibility in the hours that carers work, study or volunteer over a 4-week period will mitigate some of the disadvantage being experienced. But the real disadvantage is in the level of support being provided to carers. Full stop. For the 2.65 million carers in Australia, the current maximum basic rate for individuals on a carer payment is $1,020.60 per fortnight. That's just $510 per week for someone who's providing constant care and limited to 25 hours of work per week or 100 hours of work over a 4-week settlement period under the new rules. It's not going to get you anywhere with rent or basic needs such as groceries, energy bills and transport costs. Well, certainly not in my seat of North Sydney. I must point out that 71% of the carer payment recipients are female, and this makes this a gendered issue. While I understand the government has introduced the draft National Strategy for the Care and Support Economy earlier this year, and the reform agenda is reportedly underway, I urge the government to expedite these initiatives. The situation is becoming increasingly desperate, and far more needs to be done to address the gaps in the care sector. My community will be continuing to advocate for these reforms. Everyone deserves respect and a fair go, Mr Speaker, no matter their background. We can have a healthy, productive, thriving and inclusive society, but to achieve this we must address the root cause of disadvantage, look for ways to ensure economic and social inclusion for all, and provide an adequate social security safety net. The recent budget was an opportunity for this government to take brave and courageous action to address the root causes identified by the government itself. But the measures being introduced through this bill today, while welcomed, will fall well short of delivering the solutions that have also already been identified. Australians will not be lifted out of poverty by these initiatives, Mr Deputy Speaker, until we show bravery required to move beyond band-aid solutions and meet the challenges of the future head-on. While this bill is a small step forward, I reiterate the point that the budget is about choice, and the government has chosen to not go further when it comes to lifting Australians out of poverty. Thank you.